It's May 19th, 2016. I'm Sue Cohen with the San Marcos Heritage Association, and today we have the distinct pleasure of interviewing two sisters that are BISMs from San Marcos, Martha Soyars and Jacque Allbright. Can't wait to hear you gals tell us what growing up in San Marcos was like. Will you start telling us about your parents and how many in your family and where you were born and when you were born and all that stuff?
Well, our dad was Charles Allbright, but everybody in the world knew him as Tinker Allbright. One time he actually got a letter. We got a letter, remember, at our house, and all it had was Tinker, San Marcos, Texas.
And it came, yeah.
So
today it might not make it.
Yeah, but everybody knew him, and he was born actually where the First Christian Church is. That was the headquarters for the Allbright Ranch.
Where the garden is. Not the actual church, where that garden is.
He was born on the ranch on August 17th, and he had
1918.
1918. He had 3 brothers, and 2 died very, very young. And then his other brother was Uncle Bill, who was chief of police here in San Marcos for many years. And after Aunt Judy died, he married Edra Allbright. So we're all cousins.
Edra Pennington.
Well, Edra Pennington Allbright,
Yeah.
but hey.
And the name of the ranch was Allbright
Ranch.
Okay.
Mhm. And our mom was Catherine Thelma Teal, and she was from Tilden, Texas. And in fact, her great-grandfather was one of the original Spanish impresarios, and that ranch is still in our family today. So she and Daddy, Daddy, after he came out of the war, he worked building highways for Mr. Ruby, who was an old person here in San Marcos. And we used to say that Daddy built the road to Tilden to get Mama out of there.
To bring her into civilization.
Where did they meet? How did they meet?
Mama was an oil and gas secretary in San Antonio, and that's how they met. They met through a friend, one of her brothers, and some other friends, and it's a great story. They were truly wonderful parents. We were lucky to have
Yeah,
them.
very lucky.
So when we were born, we lived at the ranch, and we spent the first...
But we weren't born at the ranch.
No, we weren't born at the ranch.
When we were born, we lived in San Marcos. As a matter of fact, we lived on San Antonio Street, 2 different places. But before we went to the ranch, we lived next door to where Mom and Daddy's house was now, at 722.
Mm-hmm.
And Margie and I, they had twins first, Margie and myself, and we were born November 26, 1949, at the old hospital.
On Belvin Street, the Soldiers Hospital.
In fact, all 4 of us were born there. And a little side note, when it burned, probably one of the nicest gifts I guess we've ever received, or I certainly can say I've ever received. Robert Cotner went and got a brick, 4 bricks from that hospital, and engraved a little plate on there, and with our names and our birthday, because it was a remembrance, a token. It was really, really nice. But anyway, Margie and I were around almost 3 years before Jackie came along. And when Margie and I were born, or when my mother was carrying us, my mother was told by Dr. White, who was an older doctor here in San Marcos, that my mother was going to have a boy and a girl. And the boy was up higher, and the girl was down lower. Now, how they knew that in 1949, who knows? I don't know if they did x-rays. I don't know. But anyway, so my mother promised my grandfather, Daddy's daddy, that she would name one of them Martha. And she didn't want to do that. She wanted to name us Patricia and Priscilla. But she promised that she'd name one Martha. So
because that was our grandmother.
In her mind, it was done. It was a done deal. She only had to come up with a boy's name. But oddly enough, I was the boy. I was the one up high, was born second, and I got the name Martha. We used to laugh. They used to say Margie was named after one of Daddy's girlfriends. Because Mama never had an M name.
So Priscilla went away.
Yeah.
Priscilla went away.
But anyway, it was great fun growing up there. And I was just telling Jackie last week, I can remember my mother wanted a I don't think Jackie was around yet because my mother never spoke of it. But she might have been pregnant with Jackie. But she wanted to take a bath really bad. And she locked all the doors in that little house, 722. But she went into the bathroom and she took a bath, and the telephone just kept ringing and ringing, and she wasn't going to get out of the tub. She just, it's nobody, it's not important. Come to find out, it was Aunt Judy next door. Margie and I had gotten up on a stool, had taken a broom, unlocked the door. We were playing in the middle of San Antonio Street with our Cocker Spaniel, Free Holy. And Mama said that she didn't know if she should be mad at us or if she should be glad that we never got hurt. But see, you couldn't do that in today's time either. They speed down San Antonio Street. That in that day and time, it was easy, probably. Anyway, then Jackie came along. Jackie, you tell.
And then it got more chaotic.
It got
Yeah,
more chaotic.
it did.
And then Katie was born, and Daddy built Mama a house at the ranch where that church is. The old house had been torn down, and Daddy built Mama a house, and the old Allbright house at 720, I think it was 724, was the address. It was a big old house there where the 4 houses are. And that house was torn down in 1950. And 4 houses were built. It's the same lumber, the same windows, everything built. That's how big it was. It was big enough to build 4 houses. And so that Uncle Bill and Daddy owned 2 apiece, and then later on Daddy bought Uncle Bill's 2 houses, and so that's how
Did they build the houses there? Y'all, so they've been in the Allbright family up until
that. We've been at that lot since 1913.
Wow.
Granddaddy built grandmother a house there. Granddaddy and grandmother lived in Staples. They were the Allbrights and the Garys. They grew cotton, and Granddaddy had a meat store on Hopkins Street. It's where it's that peach-colored building. I don't know what it's called now anymore. Right there on Hopkins, to the right, past the State Bank. It's down that street before you get to Simon's Bakery. It was right in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then Granddaddy built grandmother a house there on San Antonio Street later on in 1913, and that's when they built that house. And what happened was in the spring, they would all move. The household and all the people that helped take care of the servants and so forth would go to the ranch. They went out there for spring roundup, and they stayed until fall when school would start, and then they'd move the household back into San Marcos.
Oh, wow.
And 4 miles doesn't seem very far now, but in that day and time, it was, I'm sure, quite a trek
Well, it was
to go
way
from
out
there.
in the country. How big
Exactly.
was the ranch? How many acres?
1,500.
acres.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
And so you predominantly ran cattle out there.
Yeah, it was a working ranch. We used to laugh because we'd watch, our biggest thing on Saturday night was Gunsmoke if we were good, and then Sunday night was Bonanza. And we'd laugh because Bonanza, I mean, they had all those boys, and we'd have all the girls, and it was a working ranch. It was just like that. You had your chores to do, and you had different things to do.
So y'all helped like cowgirls.
Well,
and
all
Daddy-
we were doing big things.
But Daddy had one rule. As long as we were on that side of the cattle guard, we could be boys. We could help. We could do whatever.
Yeah.
But when we crossed that cattle guard, we had to have on dresses. We had to dress because we were Tinker's girls going into town.
Yeah.
And we had to be on our very best behavior. We had to be girls then, ladies, not just
we
girls,
weren't always
ladies.
on our best behavior.
No,
though.
but we did try.
We did try. But we would go to town. This was crazy. So we would go to town and at Ho's Grocery, and Mama would call in, and we didn't know how it all worked. We just knew that we would get in the car, and this man that worked for us, Mr. Satterwhite, he would take us into town to pick up the groceries. And we'd go in, and they'd have the boxes, and they'd bring them out to the car, and we'd wave and say goodbye. We didn't think anything cost anything.
Yeah, we didn't
Because
know.
we never saw money. Nobody ever asked us for anything.
Same thing with gasoline. You just drove up and they filled your car up and you waved goodbye, and you knew the attendant, you waved goodbye, and we had no idea.
Everybody
no
we
concept.
interview talks about Ho's Grocery and how their mama would call and the groceries would just
They'd be ready
appear.
for you.
Yeah.
Do they talk about party lines?
No, talk about
You know, when I
Oh,
talk
yeah.
to the kids up at the university, we'll have lunch together sometime, and oh my God, I feel like I'm 150 years old. And we talk about party lines and how if it was 1 ring, it belonged to so and so. If it was 2 rings, it belonged to so and so, and 3, and so on. And they're just going, You all talked on the same line? Yeah, we did. And sometimes you could just pick up the phone and listen to your neighbors talk. And they went, You did? I went, we did all the
and
time.
That was big entertainment.
Oh,
It
it was.
was.
And the cardinal rule was 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And when 5 minutes was over, you better hang up. You
So
know.
the line would be open for other calls.
But everybody
Exactly.
was nice about it out
real,
on the
real
Waverly
nice.
Highway.
Yeah.
They were nice. But yeah, that's hard to explain to kids these days
Yeah.
because they don't even know. Very few of them even know what landline phones
And you didn't
are.
have to dial the home number either. You know, it was like
The last
299
6944.
6944, and
There
then
wasn't any-
and then it went to a 2, and then it might have gone maybe to the EX. You know, but I mean, it grew. It changed over years, but it was so easy the first 4 numbers.
And now you have to dial 512
Yeah.
no number.
Yeah.
So in the spring, y'all were out at the ranch. When you were school age, did you go to the
We
ranch?
weren't. Mama and Daddy
Daddy.
was, and his family.
So y'all were in town.
So when we came along, we
No. This is when Daddy was growing up, Sue. His
Oh.
whole family would leave San Antonio Street and go out to the ranch.
Gotcha. It was
When we were coming up in school, we lived at the ranch. We moved there after Katie was born. She was born in June, and we moved there that fall, probably.
Okay.
And we stayed there until Margie and I were freshmen in high school. So that would be 64, and
Oh,
Katie was born in
okay.
55.
So y'all were raised out there on the
Yeah.
ranch.
Yes.
And we were in so much that Mama was finding herself just coming back and
Mhm.
forth in and out of town.
And it was dangerous then. San Marcos was
Yeah.
not wet, and if you wanted to drink, and a lot of college kids would go to BBAC. Not that they didn't go other places. Now
Devil's
BBAC
Back.
was out on 123, but Devil's Backbone was on Ranch Road 12, and Daddy was worried, always worried, and he should be. We were involved in a lot of activities, and she was coming and going a lot, and having to stay in town and wait for somebody else to come in. So it was tough.
So that's when we made that house that at 726 double the size, and we moved into town. And when we moved into town, too bad Mr. Kyle's not in here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, talk about Mrs. Kyle and Mrs. Hockham. Were you there when Mrs. Hockham was still alive? Oh my gosh, they thought we were heathens. We
Where
never.
did she live? Well, I heard
She
about
lived-
when I moved there in the 80s. I heard about the Allbright girls.
Well, yes,
They all thought we were heathens. They really did.
We'd go barefoot. Well,
We didn't
lived on
lock
the
our
ranch.
doors when we came into town, and everybody thought that was just atrocious. But
Really,
we,
in
why,
the 60s?
Oh
yeah,
leave
we
the
said
keys
why
in
was
the car.
the keys were in the car? Daddy always said if somebody took it, they needed it worse than we did. We just never locked our doors, and we didn't lock them at the ranch. So why would we lock them when we came into town?
And we'd go barefoot, and
Yeah.
we wore shorts and little shirts. And Mrs. Kyle and Mrs. Hockham, they'd call Mama all the time, and we always were not yelling, but squealing and laughing and playing. And Mrs. Hockham and Mrs. Kyle would call Mama, and they'd go, "Now, honey, those little girls need to grow up as ladies. They're a little bit being heathens. They need to put shoes on." And so we had to learn again to dress and be sure that we stayed in the backyard so that we didn't make any noise in the front yard for them.
Were y'all glad to move to town?
I wasn't.
Not
I
at
hated
first,
it.
no.
Okay.
I was so. Now I learned to like it because we had so many friends that lived in our neighborhood, all the way down to where I guess the fire station is now at the very end of San Antonio Street, that substation.
Okay, yes.
The McIntyres lived on that end.
All the way going towards San Antonio.
Everybody knew
Yes,
everybody on
and
the
and,
street.
and we walked everywhere. We didn't drive. We walked everywhere. We went to Clunkert's grocery store and we'd get us a drink in the afternoon, or we'd go to the Sack and Pat and get a Slurpee, or we just walked everywhere. It was
Where
not
was Clunkert's grocery store?
you know where
Down
the Sack and Pack is at Bishop and
Uh-huh.
Hopkins. Okay, it was right there or right next to it.
It was right next
I
to
think
it,
so.
and
There's a house there now or something. it
there's a
seems like.
building.
Oh no, a building there.
that the
David
police-
Bowie built
police
a
cars
building
are
to
there.
sell guns or
Oh,
whatever.
that's right.
And then the
That's-
police. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's where it
Because
was.
there were a lot of grocery stores. Everybody talks
Yeah.
about the different grocery stores
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh yeah, there were a bunch, and you walked to them, and you never had money. We did. I
Yeah.
guess we were just.
and
so
you didn't even
stupid.
have to give them your name. They knew
No,
the
they
did.
did.
Allbright.
Oh, yeah.
Girl, yeah.
I ran out of gas one time at McCarty and Hunter, and you didn't have cell phones then. And this man pulled up, and you couldn't do this now. Sad. This man drove up and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I've run out of gas." And he said, "Well," hop in." He said, "I'll go get you some." And where do you get your gas? And it was at Mr. Berry's station where Zelix is now.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Mr. Berry's station." And he said, "Sure, come on." And we got down there, and he had one of these little cans. He got gas. And when Mr. Berry was there, and I said, thanked Mr. Berry. Once again, no money, didn't sign anything. And this man knew who I was. Mr. Berry knew who I was, and he took me back. He filled, put the, whatever it was, 5 gallons. When I got home, Mom and Daddy said, "Well, who was he?" And I said, "I don't know." But he knew who I was, and Daddy said, "What did he drive?" And I told him. Daddy goes, "Oh, I know who he is."
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, everybody looked out for everybody. It was really, really it was a good time. We really were raised in a good time. And I will say this, when we were in high school, Margie and I, we were juniors. Jackie was a freshman. And I believe it was my freshman year, if I'm not mistaken, Yancey Yarbrough had a heart attack. He was our principal. Now, I think
Now,
he had
he
a heart
lived
attack
there.
my freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, my junior year, between my junior and senior year, he called me to his office because I had been elected cheerleader, and he was going to retire, and he wanted me to have a key to the gym in case we wanted to have practice. He asked me to close the door. That should have been a scary thought right there. But when he had his heart attack, everybody at the school wrote cards and wrote letters. And 2 years went by, he came back to work and everything was fine. So when he asked me to close the door, I said, okay. And he told me that he was very worried when we entered high school because Daddy and Uncle Bill, they really set the bar high for us. They both were asked to leave the school.
He was the principal when your daddy
Yes.
and
No,
Uncle
he wasn't
Bill.
principal.
He wasn't
He was a
principal then.
teacher.
Yeah, he was teacher.
Oh.
But
They
he
didn't
got,
like to go to school.
no, and he lived down the street, and they used to ask. They were asked to leave the school, San Marcos High School.
So they were expecting the worst when the
He
Allbright
told me,
girls came.
he said, I honestly thought that you were heathens came up again. I really thought that you girls would be heathens. And he said, you and Margie proved me wrong. And he said, Jackie came in and I thought, oh, it's getting ready to hit right now. And he said, all three of you have proved me wrong. He said, I guess it's good that I'm getting out now. And I thought, well, Katie wouldn't be that way. But anyway, he told us that he was really glad that we were not. The apple fell a little bit further from the tree. He was tickled to death.
Now, what year did you graduate?
In 1968.
So
and
you were a cheerleader there when they won the state football championship?
No, I was a freshman when let's see. They didn't win the football. They won they got runners up my freshman and sophomore year. But they did win basketball my freshman year. It was
I heard
wonderful
San Marcos
sport.
was really
Yes,
was good.
yes.
the place to be back then.
And another thing that the athletes dressed so nice then compared to now. They all wore blazers and pants and a shirt, and they dressed for pep rallies. They dressed when they represented the school. They got on the bus and went someplace. And now, pants down to here.
Right.
I mean, it's just sad.
Were the football games there at the old high school on Highway 123?
No.
Where were the
The
football
Evans,
games?
where that big parking lot is now at Evans Field.
It's right by the railroad tracks.
So
That's where down. It
Oh.
wasn't that long ago. Well, I guess it was long ago.
Probably 20 years ago,
Yeah.
maybe?
It
20, I don't
compares.
know.
It doesn't compare to the big stadium they have today.
But it was sure packed.
Yeah, it was
Standing
packed
room
every
only.
Friday night.
That's right.
So, but anyway, we had a good time. When we moved into town, the lot next to us was empty. So Jenna and Bobby Moore would come down, and even when Donald Patrick Raines, who we call Booger, even when he was a little boy, he'd bring his go-kart. Do you remember that? And
I'm
make those.
afraid I do.
Oh my gosh! But we loved him. He was wonderful. I mean, my mother, who was the biggest disciplinary. Oh, honey, now whatever you want to do is fine. And we'd all look at her like she had lost her mind. But
See,
she
I
just
thought he
loved
was
him.
a heathen.
Yeah. But we played together, and we did.
Y'all played baseball and stuff
We
in that
played
vacant
football
lot?
there. We played baseball there. Yeah.
It was so much fun. I hated it when they sold it.
Well, yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just had, when we were in school, Daddy had a Winnebago, and we'd take a trip on the Winnebago, and all four of us got to take a friend. Now think about that man and 8 girls and our mother, and we'd take a trip.
And a dog.
And a dog. We
What
took
kind
Lady.
of places? This was in the summer. Where would y'all go?
Oh, we went to Rio Dosa, I remember
Mm-hmm.
that, and then we went
Carlsbad. We went to Yellowstone
Yeah.
one year.
in Carlsbad
It was
Camp.
like a rolling slumber party.
It was,
Uh-huh.
but Mama wouldn't let us sleep on it. She was afraid. So now you talk about an expensive trip. We would go into a hotel, and we would get 3 rooms, 4, 4, and 2.
But Daddy couldn't sleep on it. He could sleep as long as it was moving. If it stopped, forget it. And one time we were driving, and Margie and I were the only ones up. Everybody else was asleep. And Margie and I we were on our last leg. We pulled over. It was well lit. We pulled over. We pulled that bed out above the driver's seat, just laid down, and Daddy woke up. Why'd we stop? Where are we? Why'd we stop? Oh, we'll get right back up and go right back to it. It was hard.
It was
hard.
tough, but it was
Yeah.
fun. We
It
had
was
a lot
fun.
of fun. We always had a lot of fun. And did anybody talk about Mr. Marnie's pharmacy?
No.
Oh,
Do you know that when school would start, a list came out? I don't know if a list comes out now, but a list would come out what you needed for your school supplies, and you would walk in, and they already had bags ready for you with your name on them.
Mm-hmm.
That was another thing we didn't think cost anything.
They just gave
We
it to
just
you.
found our bag and walked right out. We weren't
So
very
your
intelligent.
name was
were
on
we?
the bag.
Yeah, they knew everybody. And Mrs. Marnie, you talk about an angel. She knew everybody, and he did too. But she was always out front, and she would just help you along and show you what was in the bag and
I
let
think
you walk
Mrs.
out
Corf
with
worked
it.
there too, didn't she?
I don't remember.
think
I
for
just
a while
remember
Mrs.
Mrs.
Corf
Did
did.
y'all like to go to the Ben Franklin too, the dime store?
Duke and Ayers.
Duke and Ayers was
Duke
there
and
when we
Ayers,
were
that's
there
right.
on the
A lot of
corner.
people talk about the Duke and Ayers.
That was it. It was right down the corner where that dance studio is.
Yes.
And then they had the elders had a. I remember lawnmowers, but I guess it was it wasn't a hardware store, but it was over. There was Penny's, and then it seems like it was right next to it. The Van Gundys, not the elders. The Van
That's
Gundys.
right.
That's right. And it was once and then the Dollahite shoe store. Oh, we loved to go
Mr.
there. We
Dollahite,
loved
yeah.
Miss Dollahite, but we had major crushes on Jim Hose. Major.
And who was he?
His daddy was Ray Hose, wasn't it, Ray? And he lived up on Roy. Was it Roy? It was Roy. That's right, because he had a son named Roy that was
See,
a
it
doctor
takes
here in
both of
town.
us to remember.
And he lived on Ranch Road 12, just as you after you pass. What's that side street, Jackie? It's not Holland. Not that's on this side. What is that side street? And it just as you go over that hill, kind of. And there was a house right here that they remodeled. And there's a church just right past it. And then the Houston's place.
Right.
It was right there on top of the hill. And I think he was a lineman in town. But his son was so good looking. And Mr. Dollahite was his father-in-law. And when we would go in, we just, he was just such. We just
he
loved
paid attention
him.
to a
He
bunch of
did.
dorky little
and
girls
Mama,
running around.
Mama went along with it and play. We did. We just loved to go
Well,
there.
y'all bought a lot of shoes, I would imagine,
lot.
with four girls.
Well, yeah, it was after we started wearing shoes.
Yeah, you finally got out of that.
Our clothes were hand-me-downs.
Now,
Yeah.
y'all started off
Yeah.
when you moved to town at the high school. Now, but did you go to Lamar? You and
Katie. Yeah, I went to Lamar, and
How old were you when y'all moved into town?
gosh, let's see. I was 11. I was going to turn 12 that year.
And that had
It was
just
hard.
changed because Margie and I went to junior high at Lamar.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then when we moved,
And
we
that's where I
moved
went
into
to junior
town,
high.
we immediately started in high school. And we rode the bus. The very beginning, we rode the bus because we hadn't moved yet. And we had Mr. Sekas, Raymond Sekas. I
He would
had
pick you
him.
up at the ranch and drive you to the high school?
And I can remember Raymond Sekas was my math teacher, and that was my first class. And he was so angry every day because I would be late because of the bus.
Well,
so
at
when we
that
finally
time,
moved
That
to
stuff
town,
is different now. The bus would leave you.
Well, at that
Yes.
time, the junior high, that's where all the buses came,
Yeah.
and that's where you changed buses.
Right.
So you'd come in from, we'd come in
Oh,
from the
everybody.
ranch, and those buses would line, they
At
only
Lamar
had
School,
that many
they
buses,
would all
yes,
meet at Lamar School.
on that curb from that whole block. That's
Yeah.
all the buses we had then.
Yeah.
We're
And then
old.
you remembered the number, and,
and you
got
got
on
in
it.
another bus that went to
To
the
go
high
to your
school, and
school.
then you
And
went.
I went to school there, and then
So you
Katie, I went to school I went to 3 schools. I went to Lutheran. It was a private school because I started school when I was 4.
And that's at off of Bishop Street, that one at the bottom of the hill.
Mhm.
But it's torn down. It was a great big
Yeah.
house, real antebellum type home, and inside were the school. Oh gosh, it was great. We had such a good school there. And when I got old enough, I went to Travis. But then, as we came in from the ranch, when I got to junior high, I'd get off and go to school there. But the buses, everybody would change buses.
So you would get on a bus and go to Travis
Mhm.
after you all 4 girls rode the bus in from the ranch
Mhm.
and then went to your respective schools,
Mhm.
and then the reverse in the evening when you went home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And that's
but-
so many buses now. There's a gazillion buses everywhere, and a lot of people don't ride the bus. But we'd get the bus. We'd pick it up at 7:20 in the morning,
Uh-huh. And
see-
we could see it from the corner. It's built up now. I've often wondered how did we see it, but there wasn't that much brush. It wasn't built up, and we could see the bus coming, and we would run outside and jump over the cattle guard, jump it, and then be waiting there for the school bus. And it was wonderful.
And we got home. Now we got out of school at 3:30, but we got home by 4:20. So you can tell how many few buses there were
Yeah.
and fewer kids in today.
And the boy that got off last lived almost to the backbone, almost to where that Devil's Backbone is. He lived on the right, and it was not quite before you went up the hill. It didn't go to. It was past Purgatory. It was past Purgatory in Ranch Road 12.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 32 then. I guess it was 12 then, but or 32.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So in high school, it was 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade.
Right.
So and junior high was just 7th and 8th grade. So now it's all changed.
And Margie and I went to Campus Elementary, which was up at the college, because we didn't move to the ranch till we were 9. So Margie and I went to campus our 1st and 2nd grade, and we had the same teachers, 1st and 2nd grade. Margie had Mrs. Turner, but I had she's truly my most favorite teacher of all, Mrs. Reesner. And I had her, Joyce Reesner. I had her 1st and 2nd grade and adored her. And then went on to 3rd grade there and had Bernice Musgrave. And then the 4th grade, everybody scattered. We went to Travis, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and then junior high. So we all went to Travis. We just all didn't. I didn't ever go to what was Crockett and now is Mendez. Is that what you were telling? No, is it Irene?
I think so.
The old Crockett, whatever it is now. Katie went there. Did you go there, Jackie?
And the kids from Martindale came to school with us.
Yeah.
When I was in
and from
6th
Wimberley
grade,
too.
When I was in 5th or 6th grade, that's when Pam Harper came.
So Wimberley kids came here too.
They had to drive. I don't know that there was a bus. Yeah, and they carpooled a lot. And I know I went to school with them 9th through 12th grade.
But now there are schools everywhere.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any memories of like big things that happened, like, I don't know, floods, politicians that came to town? Tell me some of the things you remember, like the big goings on.
We were thinking about, I don't, this does make us old. When we had elections, they had this huge blackboard on the lawn of the courthouse square.
Yeah.
And they would write the people's name, and they would come up and erase it about every 30 minutes or so and put the numbers.
It was a big deal to go down there. People would just flock there like sheep.
Stand on the lawn to watch.
To see what they're... And it was very Democratic then. I want to say the Hays County was more Democratic than Republican. I really do believe, because I remember you didn't. It was just the biggest
big lights on the lawn. I mean, it was like a party. People go down there and just watch the returns. But now that is old. I can barely remember in the White House, in the courthouse, going down the steps. That's where it had the fountain for white people only, or the black people had to go down through the door. And as kids, I don't think Mom and Daddy ever answered that question because we couldn't understand why that door said that.
We had. The Satterwhites were a friend of ours. They had worked for Daddy's daddy and helped Daddy. And like Jackie said, we called him Ratty. He would take us to town. We'd get taken to town to get the groceries. He was our friend, so we never realized. When we lived in town, we were 1 block from Dunbar. So we never realized there was any, I don't know why. I don't know. It never occurred to me why they didn't go to school with us, because we saw them after school. So it never occurred. And I remember in junior high, 7th grade, they were in school with us. And I can remember we already knew so many of them.
So you were in 7th grade when San Marcos was desegregated.
And I can remember this, my senior year when Martin Luther King got killed. I can remember the kids in the classroom had heard about it. And they all, a lot of black kids went to the library. That was a library then, the principal's office. And they asked him to lower, and the principal was Mr. Smith, I think. He was brand new. And they asked him to lower the flag, and out of respect, and he said he couldn't until the governor told everybody to. They walked back outside and sat on the steps. There was no demonstration, no anger, no signs. Sat on the steps. I don't know how long they were there. I don't know how long it took. But once he got word, he went outside, they lowered the flag, and all of them went back to their classrooms. Wow. It wasn't, we all got along so well. I don't know why people can't get along well. I do think a lot of it is in the home. I really do. Because Jackie's right. Mom and Daddy never told us or made us believe that anybody was any different than us or we were different than anybody else. And I do think in the homes now, I do think people
in 1970, that was the big flood. That was before all those dams got built on the Purgatory. And we were on our way to school, and it was Martha and Katie and I. And right there at the Sonic, right past the Sonic, in fact, they just recently rebuilt that little bridge.
Right.
We got stuck behind the school buses, and we were on that bridge, and here came this wall of water. It came in the car, and there was a maintainer. Thank God. And we went out the window. We got out of the car before it washed down the creek.
What's a maintainer?
A maintainer, one of those pieces of equipment that has a blade on the front.
Oh, okay.
So we got on the maintainer, and the car washed down, and the three of us, he took us back up
Who
to.
was driving?
Me.
Oh,
I
well, you
was
were driving
driving.
the car, but we don't know.
You
I
were
forgot.
young. You were teenagers
Yeah.
going to school.
And we got on that maintainer, and they took us back up to Houston Meat.
No,
right there
no,
by
no,
the railroad
We
station.
got off and walked.
Yeah, but that's where we were headed.
Right, but I will say this: right across from the Sonic, it's on the corner there. I think it's an automotive place, and we stopped there. There was a gas station, and we asked if we could use the phone, and they let us. We were the last phone call out, and we called home and told our mother what had happened, and then we held each other's hands and walked from there up to Houston Meat Company in that water, and the water was deep. And it was hobo day, right?
I'm 5'10", and the water was up to
Yeah.
over
But it
my
was
waist.
hobo day at high school, and you were dressed for it.
Linda Pennington was talking about the flood during Hobo Day.
That
and
was the worst.
some
flood.
people made it to school and got stranded, and then
Yes.
some didn't. I've heard about that.
Yes.
But we did walk to
And
Houston, and it was
It
up
was
on
in
higher.
May in
It
1990.
was May 1970.
70.
Uh-huh.
That was the big. When they talk about the floods, I know we've had
That was
floods
the big
since.
one.
That was the big one.
Well, there were
because
no dams.
Yeah, those dams weren't built yet. And so we made sandwiches at Houston Meat Company for people that were working, just the volunteers trying to get people. And the sad thing is you could hear dogs and cats. They were drowning because they couldn't get anywhere. You know, you could hear people on top of roofs hollering. You
So
couldn't
y'all
see
were
them.
stranded there.
We were
You
stranded.
But at least Houston
You
Meat
couldn't
Company
get
was up
back
high
home.
enough that we were not in water.
We got home on the maintainer again. It went right down San Antonio Street, Sue. It stopped right in front of the house. We got off, and Mama was sure glad to see us. And Daddy
Where
was
was your dad?
Daddy was out of town. He was on a cattle buying trip, and he
Mhm.
kept hearing this. But you know, he couldn't believe it because you know he had been born here and raised here, and he couldn't believe that San Marcos literally was underwater. At Ocarina, the pigs were floating, the alligators were loose. You know, everything was just floating because there was just water everywhere. This place was underwater. But San Antonio Street, if you recall, of all the times it's ever flooded, even down there by Bill Taylor's place, it never floods where we are. It's a little bit higher. So we've never had problems right there. But everywhere else, you realize where you are in town
Right.
on those floods. But oh yeah, oh gosh, that was a bad one. And down on the river, Uncle Bill and Idra had a house down on the river.
On Riviera.
And I mean, it was almost to the ceiling. The water line was almost to the ceiling. It took them a long. They had a real pretty place down there, but it
It's
took
a
them
miracle
a long
nobody
time.
was killed in that flood.
Yeah,
That was
It
because
is.
it happened in broad daylight the
it
first
did.
thing
It
in
was
the
early
morning.
in the morning. Yeah,
It
It
been
was early in
raining
the
all
morning.
night, I guess. Or
Mhm. Now, when I was a little bitty girl out at the Gary farm,
Yeah.
you know, our grandmother was a Gary. And the Gary farm is right there on the Blanco River on the right before you cross the bridge. And we were little.
Right past those model homes.
We were little bitty girls. The only reason I can remember this is because we got to eat donuts.
A lot. All the donuts we wanted.
But it was late at night, and it was a two-story house, and we were up on the second floor. It had to be about 1955 or somewhere.
It was in the 50s.
And they brought in the National Guard to put bags along the river because that was the first time that was the very first time that the Blanco River was coming over.
Wow.
Remember last May
we could
when it
hear
did it
it.
again?
We could hear it from that
Yeah.
up on the second floor. We could hear it, and it was dark, so you can't see it. You know, we didn't have spotlights and stuff, but you could hear it, and you knew. It was scary.
And then when LBJ got elected president, did anybody talk about that?
No.
Well,
Tell us.
he came to town, you know, San Marcos, he's their favorite son, but he was also hated by many people. And when they wanted to change the street to LBJ, was it Mr. Sarur?
I think so.
It was Mr. Sarur.
I think.
And
And
Mr.
Mr.
Kyle,
and
it
Mr. Kyle,
was Mr.
too.
Kyle and one other person.
And Mr. Sarur, I think, they didn't want it named after him. So he
It was
loved
North
and hated.
Austin Street, and yeah.
Yes, it was Austin
And it
Street.
needed to stay.
But anyway, they had a big parade for him, and so we had a babysitter named Lisa. She was a German lady, and she had married a guy in World War II, and they came and settled here. The nicest lady in all of the world. Well, he's driving by real slow. It was almost in front of Penny's and Dollar Heights, right in there, and all she had was her. You know how checks used to be? Checks didn't have any names on it. It was just blank. Well, that's all she had, and she reached over this convertible and asked him to sign it, and she got carried off by the Secret Service and put in jail. And she was just
She
so amazed
did?
because she was an American now, and she had come to this wonderful country, and here was the President of the United States, and all she wanted was his autograph. And she got put in jail.
Got
I felt
arrested.
so
Did
bad.
your daddy go help get her
Yep.
out?
Yep. Daddy got a lot of people out of jail,
I
I
was
think,
gonna
during the
say,
years.
We never
No,
did.
we didn't go to jail.
But Daddy used to get calls a lot and
It
help
probably
people
helped
out.
that Uncle
Well,
Bill
your
was.
dad was that kind of guy that
Yeah.
everybody, he was a very special guy.
He was.
I'm sure you have stories about your dad because
Oh my gosh.
he was larger than life.
There was an old jail where, what
It's
is
where
the
that
chicken place called?
is, across from the old HEB.
The one that had the ball and chain.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And one night he roped the ball and chain right off the top of the jail and pulled it off. And my grandmother made, now remember Uncle Jack's sheriff? Uncle Jack Gary was sheriff. And so he made Uncle Jack put Daddy in jail. Daddy was just a teenager. And she made him put Daddy in jail overnight.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was bad. He was just, he went to A&M.
I don't know that he learned anything from that either, because he didn't really,
He learned not to get caught.
Exactly.
He went to A&M, and his good friend, who you knew, J.T. Yarrington, was his roommate. They had known each other since they were 7. And they went to A&M, and they stayed. My grandparents had some really good friends, and they had a house. And so they let these 2 boys stay up in the attic. The attic was a bedroom. And so
And it was in Bryan.
the Allbrights were really big Baptists, and very conservative and all of that. So they thought, when everybody went to bed, JT and Daddy went to bed, well, there was a trestle outside the house, and Daddy and JT would always use that trestle to crawl down the trestle so they could go to town. And Daddy had taken his horse to school, Plug, and he took Plug to school, so that's how they'd get around town and go wherever they wanted to go. And then they'd come back and climb up that trestle. It's a wonder he told these stories. And they'd climb up that trestle, but then they had a real problem because in those days, they were lucky if there was one bathroom in the house. But there was one bathroom in the house, but it was on the bottom floor. Well, they couldn't get up and go to the bathroom. So they took these jars, and they just used the jars, and then they put them up under the bed. And so the lady, they keep smelling an awful, awful odor in the house. Well, they didn't empty the jars. And so, because, it's hard to get down those trestles, I guess, holding your jars. But, oh, my gosh. Well, not long after that, they had to move.
Yeah.
But they were rounders. And he was bigger than life. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. He loved people. He had his appendix burst in 1972, right before Thanksgiving.
And he had just been a pallbearer in 2 funerals.
And
Jack Kirchable and Ray Perkins.
And in those days, we didn't have surgeons here. Really, the only surgeon
Was Ben Primer.
was Dr. Primer, and he wasn't available. And so Dr. Moore, I was in college. Dr. Moore told Mama that they couldn't move him to Austin. He would die because they think his appendix burst on Monday. And peritonitis set in so bad, and he keeled over on Friday. But remember, he is 6'4", bigger.
Right.
And he nearly didn't make it. But it's funny because when we got to the hospital and we all got home, there were people in line to see my mother. And what they were, Daddy had loaned all these people money, and they wanted to see if Mama wanted money or needed money, and they were coming back to pay him back.
Well, who did the surgery if there wasn't a
Dr.
surgeon?
Primer did
Dr.
it.
So he
Primer
came
did.
back and
He
did
came
it.
And
back
Daddy
and did
wanted
it.
to go to Scott and White. He didn't want to be here. And Dr. Primer told him, you won't make it
You
to
won't
Kyle.
make it.
You will not make it to Kyle. So Daddy had to give in. And then, luckily, Daddy made the right choice. And Dr. Primer was right. And then the orderlies were never tall enough to walk him. So Jackie and Margie were the 2 tallest. And they would get on either side, and he wouldn't have to lean over like this. He could just stand up straight and put his arms around him and could walk down the halls to get after the surgery. So that was kind of good too.
He was pretty amazing. He when I worked for the airlines, we had a bunch of the hoteliers over to Dallas, and they wanted to see where I lived, so I brought them all down to San Marcos. We did a lot of things. We went down on the San Antonio River. Anyway, Mom and Daddy were so gracious. So when we opened up the Dallas-London route, they had what we call an inaugural flight, and it's really, really wonderful. You take a lot of business people over there and take their wives, and it's a great trip. Well, they did it under one condition, that Mom and Daddy had to come.
Oh, how fun.
So we had to get an extra container for the hats that Daddy bought for all the Brits. And we put them in there, and every hotelier got a Stetson, and the Lord Mayor of London got a Stetson. I have a picture of Daddy where Daddy has a top hat on and the Lord Mayor has a Stetson on.
Because he always wore a hat.
He always wore a hat.
He was a true rancher.
He was.
And he
was
didn't
a
wear
true man.
jeans.
No.
You didn't catch him in blue jeans.
And so that one afternoon while we were in London, I needed to do a radio interview. Well, they wanted him to come along. Well, I got out the part that we had a new route from Dallas to London, and that was all I got to say. The rest of the time, you got to remember, the best TV show at that time was the show Dallas. And they thought
they thought he was J.R.
Everybody
they thought
thought the
J.R. had
same.
come to London.
And that's what everybody in Texas was like.
And
Yeah.
trust me, he played the part well.
And where did he get where did Tinker, the name, come from?
He had a mammy. I mean, I don't know if you say that in today's world. You probably don't. But he had a mammy.
In
Her name was Mary.
You can.
Her name was Mary. And you know in the Victorian houses how deep the cabinets are? Well, he used to stay with her in the kitchen. He'd crawl in to those cabinets. And she'd
play and hide.
And she called him Tinker. She goes, "You're in there tinkering all the time and messing up my pots and pans." So everybody called him Tinker.
That's where the name came from.
From when he was just a toddler.
And when he was... he said he used to tell us your word is as good as your word is as good as you are. He said the first deal he ever made at the bank was at the old First National, and he was 12 years old, and it was on a handshake. And I think if I'm not mistaken, he traded a horse for a car. I think he got him a Dodge, and then whatever he had to pay the extra. But your word, there was none of this signature stuff. Your word that was it.
Yeah.
What did you girls ever do anything to get in trouble with your dad? Was he strict?
Not more than once.
But he wasn't as strict as Mama.
Mama was
a disciplinarian because he was gone. And,
I would think with 4 girls, there might have been some times where y'all were sneaking around.
He got up and he was already gone to work by the time we got up and went to school. And when we went to bed at night, there were none of these warmers and stuff, and so she would wait till 8:30 a lot of times. And if he wasn't home by 8:30, we would eat and then we'd go to bed. So there were a lot of school days at nights that we didn't see him. So she was the one that ruled with she carried the big stick.
Yeah,
and
but this is what he would do. I don't even know what I did, but it only happened once. And he would look at me. He never took his hand. He never spanked us. He never did anything. He'd go, "You really disappointed me." Oh. That happened one time, and never since then.
I don't know. They had such a unique way of communication. I never heard them. They were married 41 years. I never heard them raise their voice at one another, ever. And yet he knew when something was wrong, and he would come to the door and give us this look that she's had enough. You know, you've gone too far. And you knew. Jackie's right, you knew. But one time I do remember he had words with me. He asked me to drive him to Austin. And on the way over, it was just small talk until we got to the big bridge crossing the Colorado River. And he asked me where I had been that day, and I hadn't told the truth.
Uh-oh.
And so I knew that I had to stick with my same story. So what do college kids always say? I'm in the library, and that was my story. And
not very unique.
It wasn't unique at all. And he was looking at me, and it was all I could do to keep the car on the road because I knew that he never raised his voice, but I knew the words were searing. He said, "You know, Martha," he said, "you're walking in the same shoes I used to walk in." He said, "And I'm going to tell you something. I don't ever want you to forget it. You can't shit a bullshitter." And I said, "Okay." And that was it.
So, and you didn't know Miss Hawcom, so you didn't know Miss Cooper either, did you?
Where did Miss Hawcom live?
She lived right on the corner of Scott and Santonio Street, where the Ellisons live.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, down that alley, remember before the alleys were closed? Miss Cooper lived down that alley. And both of them had those great big old Hudsons that looked like awful cars. And Miss Cooper, when she'd come in off Santonio Street, and she'd park back there where that old barn was behind the Ellison's house. So she couldn't turn that big old thing around. She'd back out and she'd go out that way. Well, Miss Cooper, she's up in the middle of the alley, and she had the same problem, so they both came at each other. One day, they're both leaving at the same time, and their cars are just like this. And Mama had to go out there and break it up. And these women were already in their 80s. I'm
Shouldn't
not
have
kidding.
been driving anyway, probably.
And so she goes, "Now, now Miss Cooper, now Miss
They were
Hawkins.
to
She
stand
goes,
off.
let's do this, and she got them out of there. I mean, they were just crazy. They were just lots of fun.
And Daddy said that in the neighborhood on San Antonio Street, they would make those big
Miss
black
Kyle
pots. Miss Kyle made big black pots of hominy, and Daddy loved it. And his mother would send him across the street to get some. She would make it for everybody in the neighborhood. She'd send him across the street to get it, and when he got home, there wasn't very much left. And it was a full deal. And so my grandmother would say, well, Tinker, you didn't bring very much back. You need to go back and get some more. So he'd go back, and he loved her hominy so much that he would eat quite a bit of it before he could ever get home. Yeah, she made this for everybody in the neighborhood.
He was a big guy, but he was very humble too, and he was very shy. You probably knew that, but he was very shy. A lot of people didn't know it because he could be loud, and bigger than life. But I remember when A&M called and they wanted to give him an award because he had been Cowboy of the Year at A&M, and they wanted to give him an award, but he wouldn't. He told them it was okay. That was so long ago. He didn't need an award.
Oh, how cute.
Yeah. He was just that way.
He was a neat guy. Now, when y'all were in high school, did you have any part-time jobs? Did you work around town, or?
No, we didn't work because we were so busy. We were in Royal Guard. We were in volleyball. I mean, we were busy.
So y'all were in sports, and you were a cheerleader.
All four of us who did sports, and I did cheerleading.
We were all in Royal Guard, Ward, and we went to, my mother would drive for all the games. My mother did so much, and I don't know how she did it because she did equally for each kid.
And y'all were all busy.
Very busy. Now, when we went to college, that's when I was a resident hall assistant.
Here in town?
No, in San Angelo in Angelo State. But that's my very first job when I was 13 in the house next door. I took care of Janice Kuhn's. There were 3 kids. And I took care of 3 kids Monday through Friday for $20 a week. And I loved it. That was my then I'd go down to Mrs. Sullivan's to the, what was it called? Where the savings and loan, it was San Marcos, what was it called? San Marcos Savings and Loan?
I think so.
Mrs. Sullivan
It's
was
right
there.
across the street from where the vault is. That was the old savings and loan.
And she started a savings account
with your
for me
money that you
with a
earned.
little book, and we'd have to go and sign.
When you put
She was great. Yeah,
everything was manual back then. What about holidays? How were holidays?
We'd always take a
At your
holiday. As soon as Christmas was over, we'd take a holiday and we'd go somewhere, just our family, the 4 of us, and Mama and Daddy. And we'd come back on New Year's Day or the day after in time to go back to school.
But we always spent Christmas Eve together.
In San Marcos.
And when Uncle Bill and Aunt Judy were there in that house, we would go there. From the ranch, we would go there. And then when Aunt Judy died, I don't remember ever going back to that house again. I guess we just started having it at our house. But it was a big deal. We always, to this day, all 4 of us still get together on Christmas Eve. That's our Christmas.
Now, did y'all have cousins? Did Aunt Judy, did they have kids?
Kay Allbright. Kay Allbright.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah,
yes.
Kay's our first cousin.
They had a son, but he died. They had a polio outbreak. Margie and I were 2, and they had a son that was about our age, and he died. And then the Basses lived down the street, and their little girl was 6 years old, and she died. But Margie and I, luckily,
It must have been scary times for your parents.
Sure it was. Yeah.
Now, who was your doctor?
Dr. Moore.
Dr. Moore. A lot of people talk about he made house calls.
He was so good. He did.
Dr.
He'd come to the
Moore.
ranch like it was no big deal at all.
When I was born on Halloween, and I was supposed to be born in January. And when I was born, they didn't have incubators, and he concocted something like an incubator. Literally, he saved my life and kept me alive, and I got to get out of that hospital on Christmas Day. But he was just, he's the biggest gossip in the world. I mean, they would tell stories and visit, and I mean, he would come to visit and give us our shots. We'd go to bed, and he and Mama would visit. And then when we moved to town, he'd always come down the street.
Or if we were sick, we might go to his house,
Right.
And then Mama would pick us up there. Mama would meet us there.
Because he had, when you walk in the back where the washing machine is, that was his like at-home office, and he kept his medicine there in the refrigerator, and we'd go down there and get shots.
He
And
was
everybody
wonderful.
said he was always. I mean, most of what he did was house calls. I mean, he was
oh,
all
yeah.
over the place.
I mean, you would never
That's
see that
something
now.
that has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's changed.
Oh, everything's changed. When kids got in trouble, I mean, we've talked about this with kids that are even older than Martha and Margie. But in those days, you know, if somebody got in trouble, like Uncle Bill or Uncle Jack, you know, one's sheriff, one's chief of police, they just called the parents. I mean, it wasn't.
Well,
and that was
Uncle-
punishment
that
enough
was
that
punishment
you knew
enough.
your parents.
Uncle
Yeah.
Jack, especially when the
He's
kids would be
police-
out drinking,
Yeah.
he'd make them call their parents and say, "I'm here at the jail. I have to stay tonight." And their parents knew that they were safe, but he would give them coffee and he'd make them literally make them stay the night. That's so. Therefore, it's kind of like Daddy when Daddy was there. I remember one of Daddy's favorite sayings, and maybe it stemmed back from the time his grandmother had him spend the night in jail. He said, "If you're going to do something, make damn sure it's worth it. Make damn sure you have a good time."
The consequences.
Yeah, so I'm sure it was worth it to him. He had a great time.
Yeah, he did. Oh, Sue, there were a lot of good times.
Yeah.
There were, and the people were so nice.
The neighborhood was so, I think one of the nicest things about growing up in the time that we did, and I know we've touched on this, everybody knew you. Everybody knew who you were. You might not know them, but they knew you, and they looked out for you. And now this, of course, a lot of it is the college is so much bigger now, and there's a lot of new people that have come in that are involved with the college. But people don't, you said it yourself, you go to the grocery store, you might see one person that you know. And yet when we would go, you'd see everybody.
Pretty much 100% of the people we interview all say everybody knew everybody.
yeah.
And they took care of people, looked out for one another.
And those that lived in town, we didn't do this. We made our own entertainment. And we did it, we thought looking back, I think we had a great
So
life.
what did y'all do?
Oh, we would go out in the summertime. We'd have seed spitting contests
Yeah.
from watermelon. We would play our own game of softball. We had the swing set. We would ride horses. We would go out into the pasture. We just entertained. If it was raining, we took TV trays and put them on pillows, and we made one of our bedrooms into a store. And we'd go along. Somebody did the cash register, or we'd play school. Somebody was the teacher and you were a student and you wrote your name in your book. And I mean, we just found ways to entertain ourselves. And I hear kids all the time that are our age say that they always went to Mickey Mouse Club, or, they saw cartoons.
Right.
We didn't watch cartoons.
Yeah,
We didn't watch
much
TV. We watched on Saturday night, Jackie's right,
You
Gunsmoke.
probably
if we
remember
were
when
good.
you got the first TV. And
Oh, the TV
Yeah,
was in
it
a
was-
big cabinet,
yeah.
and the TV was like this big.
Yeah.
And
remember the
and the
test pattern?
TVs,
it had 3 channels.
and it
And
all
then it
went
would
off
go
at
off.
midnight.
Yeah, it'd go
and they
off.
would play the
Star Spangled Banner.
And
Yeah.
and it was great. I mean, it was so you weren't dependent on it. You weren't dependent on phones in either.
Right.
Probably a lot because the party lines.
We could walk to the movie for a quarter. It cost a quarter when we went to the movie. Now that's
Wow.
pretty long.
And when
time
we
ago,
were
isn't it?
when Margie and I moved, when we all moved in town, Margie and I were freshmen. You'd ride with everybody, and in that time you pitched in $1. Everybody put in $1. That $1 for 4 or 5 girls might last 2 weeks because not everybody drove. Everybody drove a different car a different day, so
filled
that
up the
could
car.
last. Yeah, yeah. We papered a lot of houses in. I remember Dr. Moore seeing him in the grocery store one night, and he said there better not be one shred of toilet paper in his yard. His yard wasn't even on the list that night, so he was safe.
And Carol Wiley was a coach when I was in high school, and he taught driver's training. And I drove myself to driver's training because I learned to drive when I was 8 years old on a ranch. I drove a Jeep.
That's
Well, I
pretty
mean, we
funny.
drove ourselves, and I drive myself and park, and then we get in the school car and we drive. And he taught us, he made us all go and park at the Sonic. Because that was where we all went to get something to drink, and there'd be more people scratching up the sides of their cars or hitting the mirrors. And he added that to the car.
So you learned how to park at
So
Sonic
we
so you
learned
wouldn't
how to
scratch
park
the
in
car.
Sonic, yeah. I mean, I think it was very necessary.
And he didn't think a thing of you driving yourself to driver's class without a driver's license?
Well, I mean, it probably wasn't the right thing to do, but it's the only way I had to get there.
Well, that's how the world was different.
Yeah.
But he was great. But that's how it was. And if you needed help, your teachers helped you. You know, it wasn't, you weren't emailing your teacher. Your teacher was right there with you, helping you.
And we were told from the very first day of school that if we got in trouble at school, we were going to get it at home. And it's going to be worse at home than it was at school. So needless to say, we didn't get in trouble.
Yeah.
I remember my senior year, Everett Holmes called me to his office, told me that our cheerleader uniforms were too short. And his daughter Cindy was a cheerleader. And I looked right, he said, I think you need to go. It was on Fridays, we wore these little uniforms. He said, Martha, I think you need to go home and change. I said, Mr. Holmes, I said, we will lower the hem, we'll do whatever it takes, but please don't send me home because my mother, and I told him what she said, and he said, okay. I never lowered the hem. I think someone complained to him, and he was just following through because Cindy never brought it up. No, nobody else did. We never did a thing to the uniforms, but I did say to him,
and they probably went all the way almost to the knee.
Yes, they were down to here.
They were fingertips. The way when I was in high school, you're
when you stood up, it couldn't be shorter than your fingertip.
Right.
That's exactly right.
And now those cheerleader uniforms, I don't know if you've seen them, but they're like
and when we went to school, we weren't allowed to wear pants. Everybody dressed when we were in school, and it was not a big deal. I never gave it a second thought. And I see kids now. Well, I guess now they have some sort of a dress code, but before they even implemented anything, I can remember kids could wear whatever they wanted. And I remember thinking, where is the discipline?
And boys' hair could not touch the collar.
Oh, yeah.
That's the big one.
That's changed a lot.
That's coming around, though, worse, because the kids had haircuts for a while, even up at the school, but now there's a lot more ponytails and hair everywhere.
All colors.
Everything comes around.
Colors.
You just have to kind of go in circles. We've lived here long enough. We've lived long enough to see several circles.
Yeah.
Well, you work at the university. How long have you been up at the university?
I've been up at the university for 15 years. I'm going to retire August 31st. I'm real excited.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes from the university perspective.
Oh, Dr. Trout's done an excellent job in bringing programs there. It was hard getting through the name change, but everybody lived to tell it. But the programs are great. I think just the physical look of the university is beautiful. And it's going to grow. We're building an engineering building. It's going to be state of the art.
Where is it, Jacque?
We had it. It's going to be right up from the funeral home. You know where the housing office is on the corner? Mm-hmm. It's right at that empty space. Oh, wow. And it was drawn initially as a 3-story building. It's already 4 before ground was broken because we have so many. Our engineering school of science and engineering is already full. I mean, it's got a wait list. Wow. So that building's going to be great. We're going to build a new building at Round Rock. The whole school of health is going to move to Round Rock because we just don't have any space down here.
So we're not just a teacher's college anymore.
No, not at all. We're going to have 40,000 students in the fall.
Did any of the sisters go to Texas State?
When I first graduated from high school, I went that summer. But Margie went to school there for a while,
Margie did.
I guess. And Katie went there one summer, I think, because she was at the Uvalde Junior College. And I think one year, either between there and Sam, she went. But I think Katie went one summer.
Y'all grew up here. You wanted to go to college somewhere else,
somewhere else, yeah. But, the college and the city have a unique relationship. But maybe one day it'll be warmer than it is now. But... I don't know.
Just depends on who you ask.
It does. I mean, I think the college does a lot for the city. It's just that the city doesn't have the infrastructure to support it. That's a big part of it.
Right.
So,
right.
But I moved back after many years in airline. I had a great life. I've traveled everywhere. The only other 2 places I want to go to is Africa and Russia.
So you had 2 full careers, really.
2 full careers. I'm old. I'm old.
You didn't think you'd ever be doing a historical interview. That makes
No, but I'm glad you included us because our family, we've been here a long time. Our grandfather was a county commissioner.
Yeah.
We had a chief of police. We had a sheriff. I've been on some boards. We try to give back. So we love the city. I just wish it could be a little bit different. But because it's growing whether it wants to or not.
That's right.
I was sent down here, when I worked for American, I was sent down here to a meeting. I forgot what year it was. It could have been like 1980. And Henry Cisneros was mayor of San Antonio, and he was in the meeting. And what he wanted, and I forgot who the mayor of Austin was, but I represented American Airlines. They sent me because I was from San Marcos, and they thought maybe I could talk some people into saying. But they wanted to build Gary, who was named after our second cousin, Edward Gary. They wanted to make that an international airport because during World War II, you could land B-52 bombers there. So the runways were wide enough for 747s, and in those days you needed it. And so we came down here because this was just going to make a huge difference.
A regional airport.
It was going to be
a real hub.
It was going to be an international airport. They saw it like DFW, and they were going to bring like Austin, San Antonio together. Henry Cisneros was the Golden Corridor. That's what they called it at that time.
Why didn't it happen?
San Marcos didn't want it. There'd be foreigners here. There'd be people from away from San Marcos. There'd be too much traffic. It was just so many different things.
We're still doing that same thing.
Same thing today, and it's just so sad because it would have really been a
changed
good
the town.
Mm-hmm, it would have been really good at that time, but they just didn't want it. So I didn't succeed in that meeting at all. I knew everybody in the meeting, but I didn't succeed.
Do y'all keep up with high school friends and do have reunions and?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of high school reunions.
It seems to be another thing that's a little unique about San Marcos. The classes really, people still have friends from junior high, lifetime friends.
Elementary school. Tommy and I often say we met each other when we were 6. We've known each other since we were 6.
He grew up here. He's a BISM too?
No, he was born in Bryan.
Okay.
And then his daddy graduated from A&M 2 weeks later, and they moved to Sabinal, but he moved here when he was 6 in San Marcos. But Bill Wyatt, he wasn't born here either. He was also born in Bryan because his daddy was A&M. But we go all the way back to the 1st grade. And so it's me and Margie and Bill and Tommy, and we're still friends. And that's very, very, very unique and very unusual that you can go back to the 1st grade and still have somebody that you
grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I look down San Antonio Street, Davy Bass and I, we were like brothers and sisters, and we spent, we'd always go down to their house all the time. They were like second parents to us. We'd go down there and practice on them before we had to go back and tell our parents something. But Mrs. Bass was just a wonderful, wonderful lady. But yeah, we're still friends today, and Clay Sullivan, Mary Colgan, all of them, we grew up together. So, and it's nice. Every once in a while we get laughing, remembering things and how dorky we must have been at that time, but we all thought we were all so cool.
We were.
You were, that's right. Y'all went to the movies, you drove around.
I can remember it was a Sunday, and Margie and I turned 12. And I wanted to go to the movie, and I can tell you it was a Debbie Reynolds second time around. And the reason we wanted to go, because by golly, we were going to get to pay big girl prices.
Yeah, it changed.
And then I couldn't wait to be a senior so I could go back to paying little girl prices against the big girl prices.
How old were y'all when you Allbright girls finally realized about money and that everything wasn't free?
Now Jackie talked about working next door. Down the street from where Kay Posey's mother lived, Julia Posey, it was a beauty salon. But before that, a couple lived there and they had kids, and I would go and take care of their kids. So we saved our money, but we never had to use it. I mean, we used our money on whatever it is we wanted to buy, but we didn't ever have to go in and really do anything. So I'm going to say
junior high.
I was just going to say I'm pretty sure junior high or high school. I
so.
know we didn't when we were.
I always sat growing up and had my money, but then when I grew up and said, I'll have to spend my money on things like food and electric bill. I spent my money on makeup and
yeah.
Well, and everybody says you could go to the clothing stores and just charge things.
We could.
Yeah. San Marcos department.
And they would call you and tell you I have a shirt that you might like or a dress.
And the cleaners, you'd go take your clothes to the cleaners and they would fold your shirts and wrap it up in white paper.
Really nice. Yeah.
It was great. Milk, when we lived at the ranch, the milkman came to the ranch and milk was delivered in bottles about this high.
In one of those little things like where they'd have the little...
You'd have like 4 of those little bottles out on your front porch. Wow. Well, not little. I mean, they're about that high. Yeah, they'd come to the ranch. But the cleaners, we'd just go in. I remember going into the cleaners too, and they'd go, hi, and they'd hand you over your stuff, and I thought, you don't think about it, you just go.
Yeah.
That's really strange, isn't it?
They
That's
just
really
knew
great.
who we were. Oh,
Well,
it
no,
really
it
was.
is really great.
I think
It
that's
is.
one of the best things about growing up here, that I lived in a much bigger city, and everybody that we talk to talks about that.
Oh.
And I hear a lot of, Tommy talks about it a lot. They went. We didn't. A lot of people talk about the river and how much time they spent at the river, and we didn't. We came to town once a week
On
when we lived at the
Saturday.
ranch on Saturday.
And we come to
We didn't
town
have a washer and
Sunday
dryer.
to church.
Yeah, but I mean, to get all of our stuff.
What did y'all do on Saturdays?
We would come to town, and across from where it's on San Antonio Street, across from where Rick's Lock and Key. There was a
Where
washateria.
Mr. Bragg used to have the barber
Right.
shop.
That was the washateria. We'd come in and do our laundry. We'd go to the grocery store. We'd do whatever other kind of errands we needed to do, and it was an all-day deal to do your.
All 4 girls helped Mom do that?
We all came to town
don't
with
know
her.
that we
I don't know
helped.
that
We
we
came
helped,
to
but we all
town
came
with
to
her.
town.
I
And
think
then.
That's why it took all day?
Well, no, the washer and the dryers, yeah, for the week's worth, yeah. But
Yeah.
she would bring us all into town, but we would all come in and
And do
hang right there with her,
And
yeah.
then go to this grocery store.
Mhm. to the
And
grocery
we Weast was the grocery store then, and it was where the old phone company used to be. And we would go there, and we just loved Mrs. Krakow. She worked in the bakery, and she sometimes would slip us little sweets, little treats. And there was a man in town, we were just talking about this the other day, Tom Nance. He lived out on the ranch. It used to be the Nance Ranch, then I think.
It was right behind the Freeman Ranch.
Yeah. And
They all came
he was tight. And he used to come into town, and he'd see us at the grocery store, and he'd give my mother a nickel and tell her to buy us all a piece of candy. And I don't know how much my mother had to contribute so we'd all get a little piece of candy, but he was doing his part, and I really think it was a golden
When Mama
time.
would take us to the grocery store when we were little, we'd go straight to the cookie aisle,
Yeah.
and you had these little boxes of animal crackers,
Yeah.
and we each had a box of cookies. We'd line up behind her, and that's what we did. We'd eat our cookies all the way through the store, so we'd stay with
Like
her.
little birds.
Yeah, we didn't pull stuff off
little
the counter.
ducklings
We were
following
like
behind
little
her.
ducklings, yeah. Until sometimes now I loved grapes, and I'd go by the fruit and I'd try to grab grapes, and they'd ask when we check out, should we put her on the scales too? But we didn't. I mean, the things we did bad aren't really. I mean, they're not really bad.
And Mama would be arrested now if she was alive.
Yeah,
When
she'd spank us.
Margie and I were little, she went to Weast and parked in front. And she
left
went
you
inside. Yeah, she left us in the car, and we're little, and we have little coveralls on. She goes in the store, and as she's going to check out, she hears everybody laughing, and she doesn't know what they're laughing at. And then she checks out, and Leroy Schleter was the sacker at that particular time. He could do everything. You could do the checkout or whatever, but he's sacking, and he is leading the laughter. And Mama asked him, Leroy, what's so funny? And he pointed. And Margie and I had gotten out of the car, and there was an empty space there, parking space. Margie and I had taken our little coveralls down, pulled them down. We were TTing there next to the car. And everybody in the store is laughing at us. Everybody. Now she'd be arrested for that because she left us in the car. We could have gotten hurt.
You could have been arrested for public nudity.
Yeah, indecent exposure.
It's such a that just sums up what a different world it
Well,
is.
that goes back to everybody knowing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that nobody was going to get hurt.
Well, it was a simpler time.
Mhm.
Not locking your doors.
Yeah.
Not,
And
we
it was
didn't take the keys out of the car either.
But we never felt deprived that we didn't get to do these things these other kids did, like the river. Like we learned to swim at the river. Mama would take us down there, and that's where we all learned to
swimming
swim.
pools, apparently.
No, when we would go, our vacation was to Corpus. We stayed at the same hotel. Went on a Friday night when Daddy got off work and came home on Sunday, and it had a little kitchenette, and we had to learn to swim so we could swim at this, at that pool. They had a pool there, and to go to the beach. But I never felt like we missed out on everything that I hear all these other kids talk about.
Well, people didn't go out to eat.
No, we had dinner every night, and Mom and Daddy would ask us questions like that. That's what we would learn.
That was our time to visit.
What'd you learn today? Sunday dinner. What'd the Padre say today? We were raised as Catholics, and Daddy, what'd the Padre say today? And you better have an answer because.
And Sundays were unique because we would go to church. And Daddy would go in and check the cattle and everything. We'd come home. We'd eat a big Sunday meal. We'd take a nap. When we got up from that nap, we'd all pile in the car. We had a station wagon. We'd all pile in the car, and we'd go to Canyon Lake. And they were building it. They were building the dam. Mm-hmm. And every Sunday we watched. And Daddy knew a lot of people that lived up there. And he saw their ranches just covered, with water. But every Sunday we would go up there.
Mm-hmm. Did your dad think that was a good thing, the dam and the lake?
Yeah, because there have been a lot of floods during the years, and so yeah. And then after the water was in, after the Canyon Lake opened, Daddy would come home every night after work. And it was after daylight savings time had started, he'd take us skiing every afternoon.
Every day.
How he did it, I don't know.
Until he turned 50 in August. And from August to December, Daddy was in a funk about being 50. And Mama, polyester was a big deal then. And Mama bought him some brand new polyester pants. And so on Christmas, we went on a trip. And we were in El Paso. And we had our room, and he and Mama had their room. And he came down he'd been in a real funk now from August to December. He comes into our room, and he has these pants. He asked us which ones we liked, and it was the ones that she had given him. He asked us which ones we liked. We told him, and then he stood up on a bench or a chair so that we could hem those pants, because he's going to wear them out that night. He's going to look good.
His life changed after
That's
that.
Right.
He came back
His
to
life
being.
changed. That's right. He came back to being our daddy again.
After the polyester pants.
Yeah.
He was funny.
He finally adjusted to wearing them, I guess. I don't know. But he sure put them on that night. We hemmed them real quick, and we went out and had a good time.
Yeah. It was great. Before I moved home, he and JT told me they wanted to go see the fall foliage, and they wanted to take the train from San Marcos to New York. We could fly back. I'm just going, oh no, how am I going to do this? So I set the trip up and get everything done. We catch the train right down there across from Uncle Ted Bryan's place. Get on the train. They're already up there in that viewing car with the big windows. They get up there and get situated. I am still downstairs trying to get the bags, give the porter the tickets and all of that. By the time I get up there, we're already past Kyle. And they are sitting in those big old chairs with Bloody Marys in their hand with this porter named Mr. Charlie. And they were just having the time of their life. And I'm thinking, here, I look like a ragamuffin bringing everything upstairs. So we sit there, and by the time we got to Temple, are we out of time? By the time we got to Temple, they had everybody in that car sitting on the floor around them. They were talking to each other. They weren't talking to these people. And they were saying things like, Daddy goes, Jacque, when's the last time we took this train to Fort Worth? He goes, oh, I think it was the Centennial. And so the people are just staring, and I'm thinking Centennial. I go, that was 1936. It was like I was their interpreter. Well, then when they realized they had an audience, oh my God, they went to town. They talked all the way to Dallas, and then people got off, and as people got on, they'd still be talking. People listened to them because they couldn't imagine. They'd say, how old are they? How old are they? They're 80. They were 80 at the time. They're 80. And it kind of tells you that us sitting here telling these stories, people aren't sharing that with their families. Mm-hmm. Because I do think, and just like when we have lunch with our kids that work in our office, when we have lunch together and we start talking about these stories, they listen because it's something they can't imagine.
It's just so different. And that's why we're doing these histories, to capture what it was like to grow up in San Marcos and to
so they just couldn't imagine that, 1936. Daddy was in the hospital one year, and we got on the elevator, and as Aggies get on, they always shake hands, go class of. Daddy's going class of 37, and they're looking at him like, 37. They were the class of 2003, I think, or 2002, and they're just staring at him. I said, 1937. And they're just looking at him like, how old are you?
And someday that'll be y'all, talking about San Marcos in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing your Allbright girl stories.
See, thanks for hanging with
me. The little heathens, the heathens Turned out all right, all four of y'all. Your parents would be proud.
I'd like to think so.
I'd like to think so too.